Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us on Velayat News. I'm Abru Sabzwari, and now to the top stories for today. President Obama urges greater openness in dealing with mental illness. June 4th marks the 24th anniversary of the 1989 crackdown in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. UN fails to determine perpetrator of Syria chemical attacks. Russian President Putin warns against foreign military intervention in Syria. Turkey Deputy PM apologizes to Gezi Park protesters injured in the demonstrations. Egypt court convicts 43 NGO employees of inciting unrest. And in an exclusive report, the inhumane detention of Rohingya Muslims in Thailand. And now the news in detail. In his speech during a conference on mental health at the White House, President Barack Obama said Americans need to become more open about mental health issues so that people struggling with problems are not ashamed to seek help. He added that more than 60% of Americans with mental illness do not receive treatment, many of them because they are embarrassed or afraid of being ostracized. President Obama promised to start a national conversation on mental health after the shooting deaths of 20 children and 6 adults at a Connecticut school last year, although he did not mention the tragedy in his remarks on Monday. The massacre at the elementary school in Newton, Connecticut on December 14th raised awareness of mental health issues. The conference at the White House is one of the less controversial tasks for Obama on his politically tough to-do list to address gun violence in America. His proposals for new restrictions on guns have stalled in Congress, foiled by a tough fight from the powerful National Rifle Association and other groups defending Americans' constitutional right to own guns. But there are signs of bipartisan interest in Congress in taking steps to deal with the lack of access for mental health services and trained professionals in the field. According to the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, mental health illness is common in America. As many as 1 in 5 children suffer from a disorder. People with mental illness statistically are far more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators. And the vast majority of gun violence in America is not linked to people with mental problems. Treatment for mental illness is most effective when started early. However, President Obama said only about half of the children with mental health problems receive treatment. The problem is particularly acute for veterans struggling with brain injuries and post-traumatic stress. President Obama added that 22 veterans a day commit suicide. Tens of thousands of protesters massed in a rain-soaked Hong Kong park on Tuesday at a candlelight vigil to urge China to respect human rights on the 24th anniversary of the 1989 crackdown on pro-democracy demonstrators in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. In China, most mention of the anniversary was censored from the internet. Security was tight in Beijing, where on June 3rd and June 4th in 1989, China's leaders ordered troops to open fire on demonstrators and sent in tanks to crush a months-long student-led pro-democracy movement, killing hundreds. In Hong Kong, vigil participants wore black to commemorate the dead and held candles under umbrellas. Protesters demanded Beijing overturn its denunciation of the pro-democracy movement as a counter-revolutionary event. Many shouted, "Vindicate June 4th and never give up." Hong Kong, a former British colony, returned to Chinese rule in 1997. It's the only place on Chinese soil where large open commemorations of the Tiananmen massacre are held annually. The vigil is also held up as a symbol of Hong Kong's relative freedoms and civil liberties compared with mainland China. Organizers expected a large turnout to send a united message to Chinese new President Xi Jinping, whose government has clamped down on internet freedoms and detained anti-corruption activists. A record 180,000 people attended last year's vigil. A UN probe has failed to establish which side in the Syrian conflict used chemical weapons, but has reasonable grounds to believe that such attacks though limited scale, did take place. The investigators were not able to visit Syria for the probe. However, the UN has launched its investigation into 4 alleged incidents in which chemical weapons were used in war-torn Syria in March and April. Rebel forces and the Syrian government have accused each other of perpetrating the attacks. Paulo Pinheiro, who chairs the UN Commission of Inquiry, told a news conference in Geneva that there are reasonable grounds to believe that limited quantities of toxic chemicals were used. It has not been possible on the evidence available to determine the precise chemical agents used, their delivery systems, or the perpetrator. The conclusion is based on witness accounts and video footage. The UN team, which included more than 20 investigators, spoke to witnesses in neighboring countries and some in Syria via Skype. The Syrian conflict has continued for more than 2 years, with the UN estimating that over 80,000 have died from the violence so far. Hundreds of thousands of Syrians have fled to neighboring countries or were internally displaced. Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned against any attempt at foreign military intervention in Syria, stressing that the move would only make the situation worse. Speaking at a joint news conference after a summit with European Union leaders in Yekaterinburg, Putin said on Tuesday that any future foreign military intervention in Syria is doomed to fail. He also criticized the EU for not extending an arms embargo on militants fighting against the Syrian government. The Russian president defended his country's decision to deliver advanced S-300 air defense missile systems to the Syrian government, saying it complies with the international law and will help to tilt the balance of power in the region. Putin added that it's perhaps the best such weapon in the world, and we don't want to throw the region off balance. He, however, said that Russia has not yet fulfilled the contract which was signed a few years ago. On May 28th, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that Moscow will go ahead with the delivery of S-300 anti-aircraft missiles to Syria and that the arms will help deter foreign intervention in the Arab country. He also stated that the air defense system was a stabilizing factor. The S-300 missile system has a range of up to 200 kilometers and the capability to track down and strike multiple targets simultaneously. Turkey's Deputy PM Bülent Arınç apologized to protesters injured in demonstrations opposing the demolition of an Istanbul park. The original protests over the redevelopment of Gezi Park were just and legitimate, he said, offering to meet the organizers. He called for the protests to end, saying they had been taken over by terrorist elements. The protests have escalated into 5 days of unrest in cities across Turkey. Mr. Arınç, at a news conference in Ankara, stated that the use of excessive force shown against the people who initially started this protest with the motive of protecting the environment was wrong and unfair, after which he apologized to those citizens. However, he added, I do not think we need to apologize to those who create destruction of public property in the streets and who try to prevent the freedom of the people in the streets. Mr. Erdogan has taken a tougher line with protesters in his public comments, saying they are undemocratic. He has gone ahead with a trip to Morocco and, speaking after his arrival there, insisted the situation was calming down. A second fatality has been confirmed as protests in Turkey entered their 5th day. With several thousands already reported injured, Turks continue to flood social media with video, images, and allegations of police brutality. An Egyptian court has convicted 43 local and foreign employees of non-governmental organizations, including the U.S. nonprofit groups, of receiving foreign funds to incite unrest in the North African country. Out of the 43 defendants, 27 workers, including at least 16 Americans who went on trial in absentia on Tuesday, were sentenced to up to 5 years in jail. The court also ordered the closure and seizure of the offices and assets of the foreign nonprofit groups in Egypt, including the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and the Freedom House. Most of the American defendants, including Sam LaHood, the son of U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood, departed from Cairo in a U.S. government plane in March 2012. The departure came despite the travel ban imposed on the Americans. In late December 2011, Egyptian security forces stormed the offices of several NGOs and seized documents and computers. The crackdown led to a crisis in the relations between Cairo and Washington. Thousands of Muslim refugees who have fled religious persecution in their homeland of Burma are being forced to live in cramped and filthy conditions in detention centers inside Thailand. An increasing number of Muslims in Burma are trying to get out. Some are leaving for neighboring countries on foot, others via unstable crafts on the open sea. Activists think more than 20,000 Rohingya Muslims may have fled violence-racked Rakhine State in northwest Burma. The Rohingya are a Muslim minority population living mainly in the state of Arakan in Myanmar, Burma, although approximately 800,000 Rohingya live in Myanmar and apparently their ancestors were in the country for centuries. The Burmese government does not recognize the Rohingya people as citizens. As people without a state, the Rohingya face harsh persecution in Myanmar and in refugee camps in neighboring Bangladesh and Thailand as well. Each year, tens of thousands of ethnic Rohingya from Burma's Arakan state set sail to flee persecution by the Burmese government and dire poverty. The situation has significantly worsened following sectarian violence in Arakan state in June 2012 between Muslim Rohingya and Buddhist Arakanese, as well as the government-backed crimes on humanity committed during a campaign of ethnic cleansing in October against Rohingya and other Muslims. Thailand's so-called help-on policy towards small boats carrying Rohingya has failed to provide Rohingya asylum seekers with the protections required under international law, and in some cases significantly increased their risk. Under this policy, the Thai Navy intercepts Rohingya boats that come close to the Thai coast and supposedly provide them with fuel, food, water, and other supplies on the condition that the boats sail onward to Malaysia or Indonesia. Enforcement actions to prevent Rohingya from these vessels from coming ashore intensified after the Thai government responded to international pressure and agreed to provide temporary shelter for more than 1,700 Rohingya who had arrived in Thailand since January 2013. Under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to seek asylum from persecution. While Thailand is not a party to the 1951 Refugee Convention, under customary international law, the Thai government has an obligation of non-refoulement, which means to not return anyone to places where their life or freedom would be at risk. Rohingya families have been split up, with women and children sent to government-run shelters and separate from the men who have been placed in immigration detentions. We got a good idea of just how serious these problems are when Channel 4 News, accompanied by a group of charity workers, went to an immigration lockup in a Thai town called Phang Nga. The volunteers, who were members of a local mosque, described how the facility was severely overcrowded and they wanted people to see for themselves. We will now take you to the special report conducted by Human Rights Watch, which shows the shocking video footage of Rohingya Muslim men locked up in an overcrowded facility in Thailand's Phang Nga province. The extremely cramped conditions in 2 cells resemble large cages, each designed to hold only 15 men. The men have not been out of the cells during the last 5 months. Let's take a look.
Muslim homes and businesses destroyed, and the fabric of a troubled nation torn a little more. For many Muslims in Burma, the open sea provides the only way out. Fleeing the violence, they've sailed to Thailand in their tens of thousands. But this country offers little in return, and for many, the wretched journey has only just begun. Most of the new arrivals are Rohingya from northwest Burma, and the Thais are struggling to deal with the influx. Thousands have been put in detention centres, but they ran out of room months ago, and the conditions inside are appalling. We travelled to a town called Phang Nga with members of a Muslim charity. They told us the local immigration lockup was badly overcrowded. We had to film secretly. Cameras are banned, and it was clearly an unpleasant place to be. Before we entered, the man in charge told us to protect ourselves.
We have to put a mask on. Yeah.
We soon realized why. The overpowering stench of sweat and urine and human waste was difficult to bear. On the second floor, we found a landing and 2 small cages. As I approached the first, a wall of faces looked up. The cage was jammed. There was barely enough room to sit. This place typically holds 5 to 15 men, but it now hosts 276 Rohingya, and they've been here for more than 5 months. As we peered through the mesh, inmates said, "Help us, we can't move, release us." They looked despondent, and some seemed suicidal. Our translator begged them not to take their own lives. A small group sat between the cages, some clinging tightly to the Quran. They were sick, feet were swollen, their muscles atrophying.
The problem is that their muscles are wasting away. Is that the issue?
It's caused by lack of exercise. The inmates told me they haven't had any. They're not allowed out. Still, the gate was open for us, and as we left, we could hear the men on the second floor calling out. It's a situation that's simply unacceptable, says the local MP.
มันไม่เหมาะสมมากที่จะให้พี่น้องโรฮิงญาในฐานะมนุษย์ด้วยกันเนี่ยไปอยู่ที่แออัดอย่างนั้นผมรู้สึกเป็นกังวลเป็นที่สุดเพราะว่าการที่รัฐบาลยังเอาแน่นอนไม่ได้เนี่ย
This waterborne exodus shows no sign of slowing. Boats packed with Rohingya continue to arrive in Thailand. We filmed this group in January. They'd spent 15 days at sea, the last 5 without food and water. Oh, how we suffered, says this woman. Her name is Asha, and we met her and many others at a shelter for women and children up the coast. It was crowded, but it was better than the facility at Phang Na. You look much better than you did when you first arrived in Thailand. Still, anxiety, like the weather, hangs over this place. The women were separated from their husbands, and they don't know where the men are, nor do they know how long the Thais will let them stay. Lala May is 8 months pregnant, and she's struggling to cope with it all. The outlook from here is bleak. The Thais want another country to take the Rohingya, and they've set a deadline next month, but no nation has offered to help. Still, a solution will have to be found for these friendless and unfortunate people.
They are branded as one of the most persecuted communities in the world by the UN, yet nobody knows their name. They are the forgotten people. The Rohingya have been subject to state-sponsored ethnic cleansing by the Burmese government, despite their existence in Burma dating as far back as the 8th century. Rohingyas are denied citizenship and condemned as illegal immigrants. Targeted as a result of their religion and race, the Rohingya suffer oppressive levels of discrimination in the face of the Rakhine Buddhist majority. Land confiscation, forced labor, and denial of very basic human rights are characteristics of everyday reality for the Rohingya people. In recent weeks, the escalating violence has displaced more than 90,000 Rohingya people. Villages are being burnt, people are being abducted, concentration camps are being created, women are being raped, and children mercilessly killed. Survivors are desperately trying to escape persecution and seeking refuge in neighboring countries like Bangladesh, but are being rejected by border guards. The Bangladeshi government has even recently barred aid groups from helping refugees fleeing the violence.
Prime Minister, you know full well that they are being persecuted in their own country. They tried to run away and they're refused entry to your country.
Well, why we should allow to enter our country?
Boats of starving, injured, and dying men, women, and children are being turned away, forced to make a choice. Either return to death in Burma or wait for death on open sea. Due to the neglect from the media and governments alike, the majority of people are unaware of this dire situation.
My sisters, brothers, and other relatives were burnt alive. They burnt my own children. We couldn't bear it anymore, so we came to Bangladesh. The Coast Guard turned us back 3 times, and we floated at sea for 4 days and 4 nights, and then we managed to sneak in. 3 of our children were burned to death in Burma. Another 2 died in the boat getting here.
The persecution against the Rohingya can be described in no other terms but that of ethnic cleansing and genocide. We need to pressure our leaders to act now. They need to know the world is not going to sit by while the suffering continues. The Rohingya people need our help. Find out what you can do at wearehelp.org.
Thousands of these Muslim families have been separated and displaced. We pray for the Muslim Ummah's suffering all across the world. This brings us to the end of today's news bulletin. Today, the 25th of Rajab, marks the death anniversary of our holy 7th Imam. We would like to offer our condolences to the Imam of our time and to all of you on the shahadat of our holy Imam, Imam Musa Kadhim alayhi salam. We hope you stay tuned to Velayat TV for our special Salamia Hussein program, a live 5-day transmission from Karbala with Maulana Zahir. The program will be on tonight at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. To contribute your community's news, you can email us at news@velayattv.org. You can also catch the latest headlines and more by logging on to our website at velayattv.org. See you next time. I'm Abu Satwari.